Hey, Soul Stories fam. Today's love story will make you blush, sigh, and maybe throw a pillow. Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell like it owes you money. The ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel, nestled in the heart of Manhattan, sparkled like a precious gem beneath the glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Warm golden light reflected off the polished marble floors, mingling with elegant laughter and murmured conversations of New York's elite. Guests in tuxedos and evening gowns glided past one another, champagne flutes glistening in hand, while a jazz band played soft melodies in the corner of the room. This was the annual gala of Caldwell Enterprises, a night not only to celebrate business success, but to reinforce powerful connections. Sienna Harper, 26, weaved gracefully through the crowd with a silver tray full of champagne glasses. Her brown hair was neatly tied back, and the simple black uniform hugged her slender frame, just enough to look professional yet flattering. Her green eyes sparkled with mischief, yet they remained alert as she scanned the room. Working events like this wasn't a dream job, but it paid the rent for her tiny Brooklyn apartment and helped support her younger sister Lily. Sienna had mastered the art of smiling at the right moment, bowing just enough, and disappearing backstage before any guest lingered on her for too long. Tonight, the pressure was higher than usual. The crowd was larger, and the event was hosted by Elliot Caldwell himself, the famously cold CEO of Caldwell Enterprises. Though she had only worked at the hotel for a few months, Sienna had already heard the stories. A sharp, no-nonsense man with steel gray eyes and a smile so rare it was almost mythical. She carefully avoided his gaze as she passed near the head table, where he stood speaking with a group of shareholders. At 9 p.m. sharp, the jazz band took a break, and Sienna was granted a 15-minute break of her own. She set the tray down at the bar, exhaled in relief, and her eyes happened to land on the glossy black grand piano in the corner of the room. A Steinway with elegant curves and gleaming ivory keys stood there like an open invitation. Sienna's heart began to race. It had been years since she last touched a piano, aside from sneaking in moments with her grandmother's old upright in the living room as a child. But the memory of sunlit afternoons spent learning notes by her grandmother's side suddenly flooded back. She glanced around. No one was paying attention. The crowd was too engaged in their conversations, and the staff had all retreated to the kitchen. As if drawn by an invisible thread, Sienna walked over to the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the cold lid. She sat down on the velvet bench, fingertips brushing across the keys, feeling the familiar connection like an old friend. Without much thought, she began to play a simple melody, just a short passage of Debussy, soft and dreamy. The notes filled the corner of the room, delicate yet clear, like a quiet stream running through the noise. Elliot Caldwell, standing not far away, paused mid-sentence with a business partner. The piano's sound cut through his thoughts, pulling his gaze toward the corner of the room. He saw her a server in a modest uniform playing on the hotel's six-figure grand piano. His brow furrowed, not because she was playing, but because she played so well. The notes flowed with such refinement, without hesitation. He felt a strange tug in his chest, like something long frozen had just begun to stir. With a brief apology to his partner, Elliot strode across the room, his polished leather shoes gliding over the marble. Sienna didn't notice him approach. She was lost in her own world, eyes half closed, fingers dancing with the ease of a true artist. He stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, his steely gaze fixed on her. A few nearby guests began to notice too, hushed whispers rippling through the crowd. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice cut through the air, deep and sharp like a blade, but beneath it, a flicker of curiosity lingered. Sienna jolted, her fingers slipping off the keys as the music abruptly stopped. She looked up and locked eyes with Elliot. Her heart pounded, not because of his intimidating good looks, though he was striking, with perfectly styled black hair and a tailored suit, but because she realized she had just made a serious mistake. Staff were strictly forbidden from touching hotel property, let alone playing the piano during an upscale gala. I'm sorry," she stammered, standing quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't mean to—" "You can play the piano," Elliot interrupted, his tone devoid of the scolding she expected. Instead, there was something challenging in it. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. Play a Chopin piece, the Nocturne in E-flat major. If you can, I'll marry you. The entire corner fell silent. A few guests stopped talking, heads turning in astonishment. Sienna blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. His words were arrogant, bizarre, more of a riddle than a proposal. She met his eyes and saw something mischievous there, mixed with doubt. He didn't think she could do it. Taking a deep breath, Sienna sat back down. Fine, she said, voice soft but firm. But if I play it, I don't want a proposal. I just want you not to fire me. A rare smile flickered on Elliot's lips so quick it almost went unnoticed. He gave a slight nod, motioning for her to begin. Sienna placed her hands on the keys, heart pounding, but her fingers soon found their rhythm. She began to play Chopin's Nocturne Opus. 9 No. 2, the opening notes flowing gently and soulfully, then growing more intricate, gliding like a luminous river. Every note was struck with stunning precision, every emotion conveyed as if she were telling a story with each keystroke. The crowd gathered. The whispers ceased. Some guests pulled out their phones to record, but Sienna didn't notice. She was lost in the music, forgetting Elliot's gaze, forgetting her fear. When the final note faded into the air, the room remained still for a breath, then erupted in applause. Sienna lifted her head, breathless. She looked at Elliot, who still stood there, arms crossed, but his eyes were no longer cold. Something had shifted, a flicker of surprise, a hint of confusion, and something deeper she couldn't name. He didn't speak for a moment, then finally said in a low, near whisper, "You get to keep your job." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd, leaving Sienna with a pounding heart and the strange, undeniable feeling that something important had just happened. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Caldwell Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters, casting a golden glow across Elliot Caldwell's walnut desk. He sat there, laptop open, yet his mind wasn't on financial reports or business emails. The image of the waitress from last night, Sienna Harper, still lingered in his thoughts. The way her fingers moved across the piano keys, so confident and expressive, had caught him completely off guard. Chopin's Nocturne, once a painful part of his past, now played over and over in his mind with new color, new life. Elliot, known for his stoic demeanor, wasn't used to distractions. For the past 5 years, ever since his wife passed away, he had built an invisible wall around himself, focusing solely on work and multi-million-dollar deals. But Sienna's brief performance had shaken that wall. He needed to know more about her, not for romantic reasons, at least that's what he told himself, but out of pure curiosity. How could a hotel waitress play piano like a professionally trained artist? He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Lydia, I need information on one of the waitstaff from last night's gala. Her name is Sienna Harper. Find out everything you can quietly." Lydia, his assistant of 3 years, responded with her usual efficiency. "Yes, sir. I'll report back within a few hours." Meanwhile, in the staff area of the Grand Astoria Hotel, Sienna sat in the break room, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee, her mind in a fog. She'd barely slept after her night shift. Though the crowd had been amazed by her piano playing, she couldn't stop worrying about the consequences. She had broken the rules. Staff weren't allowed to touch hotel property, especially a grand piano worth a fortune. Elliot Caldwell's piercing stare and strange challenge echoed in her head. "If you can play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, I'll marry you." The words, clearly meant as a joke, had still made her heart race. "Sienna, you've got guts!" Maria, a fellow waitress, burst into the room with a laugh. "Playing piano in front of a room full of billionaires? Weren't you afraid of getting fired?" Sienna forced a smile, trying to mask her anxiety. "I wasn't thinking. I just couldn't resist." She shrugged, but in her heart, she was dreading a call from management telling her she was out of a job. She couldn't afford to lose it, not with her younger sister Lily still needing money for medical bills. She stood and checked the schedule. Luckily, her shift started in the afternoon. She decided to avoid the main ballroom altogether, anything to steer clear of Elliot. She slipped into the kitchen to help prepare trays for a small board meeting, hoping the work would distract her from the night before. Back in the office, Lydia returned with a thin file. "Sienna Harper, 26, part-time waitress at the Grand Astoria, she reported. No official music training. Graduated high school in Brooklyn. Enrolled at a community college for half a year, but dropped out due to financial reasons. Lives with her 12-year-old sister, who has a congenital heart condition. No records of piano lessons, though a coworker mentioned she once said she learned a bit when she was young. Elliot frowned, taking the sheet from Lydia. No formal training, yet she played Chopin like she'd been practicing her whole life. Where is she working today? He asked, his tone even, though his eyes betrayed his curiosity. She's assigned to the board meeting this afternoon, 20th floor, Lydia replied, slightly surprised by his interest. Good. Make sure she shows up, Elliot said with a nod, turning back to his laptop. But the corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly. He wasn't quite sure what he was doing, but he knew one thing. He wanted to see her again. He wanted to understand what made an ordinary waitress capable of music that could silence a room. That afternoon, Sienna stepped into the 20th floor boardroom, her heart pounding. She had tried to avoid big events all day, but management had suddenly asked her to fill in for a colleague. The boardroom was smaller than the ballroom, but no less intimidating. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by sharply dressed men and women, and at the head of the table, Elliot Caldwell sat, his cold gray eyes flicking toward her as she placed the coffee tray down. She tried to stay composed, but her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into glasses. Elliot, in a navy suit, was mid-discussion with a business partner, but she could feel his gaze occasionally returning to her. When the meeting paused for a break, his voice rang out unexpectedly deep and clear. Miss Harper, right? You look familiar. Sienna froze, nearly spilling the glass in her hand. She forced a tight smile. Yes, sir, I worked the gala last night. He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on her. You play piano quite well. Where did you learn? The question caught her off guard. She didn't want to talk about the piano, not when it reminded her of a dream long buried, a dream crushed by reality. Just taught myself a little when I was a kid, she replied quietly, avoiding his gaze. Nothing special. Elliot tilted his head slightly, as if trying to read her thoughts. Taught yourself, yet you play Chopin like that? I wouldn't call that nothing special. His voice was light, almost teasing, and Sienna wasn't sure how to respond. She let out a soft laugh, trying to deflect. Just lucky, sir. I should get back to work. She bowed slightly and hurried out of the room, heart thudding. But as she left, she couldn't ignore the flicker in his eyes, a glimmer of curiosity, a rare warmth that cracked through his usual chill. Back in the boardroom, Elliot remained seated, tapping his fingers lightly on the table. Sienna Harper was not just a waitress, she was a mystery, and for the first time in years, he was genuinely interested in solving one. On Friday evening, the soft golden lights of Manhattan's skyscrapers filtered through the windows of Caldwell Enterprises' office, casting a warm glow across the sleek interior. Elliot Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 35th floor office, watching the traffic pulse below. The space, minimalist yet elegant, usually radiated authority, but tonight it felt different. In the corner stood a gleaming black Steinway piano, its polished surface reflecting the ambient light like a silent invitation. Elliot had arranged a private concert not with a world-renowned pianist, but with Sienna Harper, the waitress who had haunted his thoughts ever since last week's gala. Sienna stood outside the office door, gripping the strap of her worn canvas bag, heart pounding. The invitation from Elliot had come as a brief message, relayed through her hotel manager, an exclusive musical evening with the famously cold CEO. She wasn't sure what his intentions were. If it was some kind of joke or another test, she was prepared to walk away. But when she stepped inside, she found Elliot not in a stiff suit, but in a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, standing beside a small table with 2 glasses of wine and a plate of cheese. You came, he said, his voice low but lacking the usual frost. I figured you'd prefer this space over the ballroom. Sienna offered a tentative smile, doing her best to hide her nerves. Sir, I'm not sure why I was invited. If it's to play the piano, I'm afraid I'm not prepared. Call me Elliot, he replied, handing her a glass of wine. And no, I'm not asking you to play. I just wanted to talk about music. She raised an eyebrow, accepting the glass, but not sipping yet. Talk? With me? I'm just a waitress, sir. Elliot. He chuckled, a rare and surprisingly warm sound that caught her off guard. You're not just a waitress, Sienna. No one teaches themselves Chopin the way you did. They sat in two leather chairs facing the piano, the city lights highlighting the sharp lines of Elliot's features. Still cautious, Sienna began to speak as he asked about her musical past. My grandmother taught me, she said softly, as if turning the pages of an old book. She had an old piano in her living room. The keys clacked every time I played. I started when I was 6, but after she passed, we couldn't afford to keep the piano. My mom said piano lessons wouldn't pay the bills, so I stopped. She paused, staring into her wine glass, fingers slowly rotating its base. I used to dream about being on stage, but life doesn't always work out that way, does it? Elliot nodded, his eyes fixed on her, not judging, just listening. There was something in her voice, honesty, tinged with a hint of self-deprecating humor, that made him feel strangely at ease, like she wasn't trying to impress him. You never tried to pick it back up? He asked. Sienna shook her head. No money, no time. And honestly, I was afraid I wasn't good enough. Playing at the gala last week, that was the first time I touched a piano in almost 10 years. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. Not good enough? Sienna, you made an entire room fall silent. Even me. She gave a small laugh, the tension beginning to ease from her shoulders. What about you? I heard you used to play. Why invite me here instead of playing yourself? Her question made Elliot fall quiet for a moment. He turned to the window, gaze distant. I did play, he said at last, voice softer. Started young, competed everywhere. I loved it, but music became tied to her. He paused, taking a breath. My wife, she passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. After that, every time I touched the keys, all I could hear was the pain. Sienna blinked, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. She hadn't expected him to share something so personal. She didn't know what to say, but the honesty in his tone made her want to stay and listen. I'm sorry, she said gently. I didn't know. It's okay, he interrupted, looking back at her, his gaze softer than before. It's been a long time, but when I heard you play Chopin, I felt something, like maybe music didn't have to hurt anymore. His words made Sienna's heart race, not out of romance, but because she understood that feeling all too well. Music had always been her escape, her silent language for the things she couldn't say. Music has a way of doing that, she said. It's like a friend always there when you need it. They continued talking, the conversation flowing naturally. Sienna shared stories of her childhood, how her grandmother taught her simple waltzes and pretended they were performing at grand concerts. Elliot spoke of his piano competitions as a teenager, how he once dreamed of being a concert pianist before business took over his life. Sienna's humor, like how her grandmother used to punish her with stale cookies when she hit the wrong notes, made Elliot laugh, a sound that surprised both of them with its warmth. In turn, Elliot's calm presence, the way he listened to every word she said, made Sienna feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. She no longer felt like just a server speaking to a CEO. They were two people, connected by music, by the echo of dreams set aside. That night, neither of them touched the Steinway. It stood silently in the corner, a quiet witness to their conversation. And when Sienna finally stood to leave, thanking him for the evening, she realized she was no longer afraid of his gaze. Elliot, left alone in his office, watched her disappear beyond the door. He felt something inside him shift just slightly, as if a part of the emptiness had been filled. A fragile connection had begun to form. Not love, not yet, but something unspoken. A quiet harmony planted in the space between stories and the music they left behind. Sienna stood in front of the soundproof room on the 35th floor of Caldwell Enterprises, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn canvas bag, her heart a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Elliot Caldwell's invitation, sent in a brief, professional email from his assistant, still echoed in her mind. Meet me in the office, 7 p.m. every Wednesday. I'd like to assess your piano skills. The wording was formal, almost cold, but after their conversation the week before, Sienna sensed there was something more beneath it. She pushed open the door, Soft lighting from the ceiling glowed over the glossy black Steinway grand piano that dominated the small but elegant, soundproof room. Elliot was already there, standing by the window, gazing out at the glittering Manhattan skyline like it was a silent symphony. He wore a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, far more relaxed than the powerful CEO image she had first known. When he heard the door, he turned, his gray eyes lighting up just a touch. "You're right on time," he said, his voice low with a trace of warmth. "Ready?" Sienna smiled, trying to mask her nerves. "Assess my skills, huh? I thought you just wanted to hear me play Chopin again so you could lose another bet." Her humor drew a quiet, genuine chuckle from Elliot Short, but real, and it caught her off guard. "No bets this time," he replied, motioning toward the piano bench. "I just thought, maybe we both needed a little music. Have a seat." They started with a simple duet, a Mozart piece Elliot had selected from the sheet music stand. At first, Sienna played cautiously, her fingers a bit stiff with nerves. She had never played a duet before, and the thought of matching rhythms with someone who had once competed professionally made her doubt herself. She had no formal training, just fragmented lessons from her grandmother and years of self-teaching. But as the first notes filled the room, she felt Elliot's subtle guidance. He played with precision but without showing off, leaving space for her to join in. "Relax," he said mid-piece, glancing over at her. "You're overthinking it." She let out a soft laugh, easing her shoulders. "Easy for you to say. You've competed. I just played for my grandma in a creaky living room." "And your grandma had an excellent ear," he said, his fingers flowing over the keys in a smooth line of notes. "You play with feeling. Not everyone can do that." His praise, simple as it was, warmed her. She refocused, letting her fingers move more freely. When they finished the piece, they both burst out laughing after fumbling a measure. "I told you I'm terrible at duets," Sienna joked, feigning a sigh. Elliot shook his head, a rare smile softening the sharp lines of his face. Their weekly sessions quickly became a shared refuge. Every Wednesday, after Sienna's shifts at the hotel, she would come to Elliot's office, where they explored duets from Beethoven to Debussy. Sometimes they hit wrong notes and laughed when their hands collided. Other times they paused to argue over the phrasing of a passage. But those moments, though small, made Sienna feel like she was rediscovering the part of herself that once dreamed of living through music. Elliot, too, began to change, though slowly. His usual cold edge softened. He laughed more. Not just the polite, fleeting smiles she'd seen before, but real, full-bodied laughter, especially when Sienna told stories about trying to learn piano in her grandma's cramped apartment, getting clawed by the family cat for playing too loudly. His hands, once hesitant on the keys, grew steady again, as if the music was helping him heal something long buried. One evening after they'd finished a Schumann duet, Sienna turned to him, curiosity glinting in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "I mean, you've got a whole world out there. Your company, parties, million-dollar deals. Why spend your time playing piano with a waitress?" Elliot paused, his fingers still resting on the keys. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing his answer. "Because when I heard you play," he said slowly, "I remembered how much I used to love music. And because—" He stopped, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You make me feel like I don't have to be CEO Elliot Caldwell all the time." His words made Sienna's heart beat faster, not because she thought it was love not yet, but because she felt something real, a connection, a friendship quietly forming in the silence between notes. She had always felt insecure about her lack of training, but playing alongside Elliot, she started to believe her talent, though unpolished, was still meaningful. In the music, she found herself again, and in Elliot's eyes, she saw genuine admiration. Elliot, in turn, found himself drawn to Sienna's resilience. She didn't complain about her life. She didn't try to impress him with flattery or pretense. She was simply herself, funny, honest, passionate about music. He admired the way she faced the world without titles or validation. As their session ended, they sat for a while, sharing a cold bottle of water from the mini fridge in the corner. Sienna told a story about playing piano in a Brooklyn cafe once and being asked to stop because she was too loud. Elliot laughed hard, then shared a memory of botching a note in a childhood piano competition and how his mother turned red with embarrassment. The small stories, the shared laughter, The lingering glances together, they made the soundproof room feel warmer than ever. The grand piano between them was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge, one that brought them closer with each note. Every piece they played wasn't just a duet, it was a step forward. Not necessarily toward romance, but toward deeper understanding. As Sienna left the office that evening, she felt lighter, as if the music had lifted some quiet burden from her chest. And Elliot, watching her disappear beyond the door, realized that for the first time in years he was looking forward to something beyond work, a new melody, just beginning to play. The soundproof room at Caldwell Enterprises, with its gentle lighting and serene stillness, had become a familiar refuge for Sienna Harper and Elliot Caldwell every Wednesday evening. Tonight, arriving earlier than usual, Sienna decided to tidy up the cluttered sheet music stand they had neglected over the past few weeks. Scattered among the worn books were printed scores of Mozart, Beethoven, and a few jazzy improvisations, but it was an old leather-bound notebook, lightly dusted, that caught her attention. She opened it, revealing yellowed pages filled with handwritten compositions, firm, elegant notations accompanied by inked comments in the margins. On the last page, an unfinished piece made her pause. The title was simply two initials, E.L. The penciled notes carried a somber, emotional melody, like a whispered story left untold. A small line scribbled in the margin read, "For Emma, unfinished. Aitzionisibnyon." Sienna felt the weight of each note, as if the composer had poured his soul into the page before stepping away. She guessed E.L. referred to Elliot's late wife Emma, the woman he had spoken of during one of their first conversations. When Elliot entered, dressed in a soft gray shirt, he found Sienna holding the notebook, her expression a mix of sadness and curiosity. "What did you find?" he asked gently, though there was a hint of caution in his voice. Sienna hesitated before offering him the book. "I wasn't snooping, but this piece, it's special. You wrote it, didn't you? For her?" Elliot took the notebook, his fingers brushing the page. His gaze turned distant. "Yes," he said quietly. "I started writing it for Emma, before she passed. But I never finished it. It became too difficult." Sienna watched him, feeling the ache in his words. She took a breath, then spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I think we should finish it, not to change what it means, but to honor it. What do you think?" Elliot furrowed his brow, clearly torn. He hadn't touched the piece since Emma died. Every note was a blade slicing through old memories. But looking into Sienna's sincere eyes, he felt something stir a quiet push. "All right," he finally said, his voice raspy. "But only if you help me. I can't do it alone." They sat together at the grand piano, the notebook open between them. Over the next several late nights, they worked side by side, weaving new melodies into the foundation Elliot had laid years before. Sienna suggested brighter chords, bringing hope into the somber opening, while Elliot preserved the depth and softness of the original to honor Emma's memory. Sometimes their fingers brushed over the keys, a fleeting touch that made them both pause, though neither spoke of it. Instead, they shared silent glances, quiet smiles of agreement when a phrase sounded just right. The room grew warmer with each session. As they composed, Sienna began to see the piece not only as Elliot's story, but as hers too. The music expressed loss, yes, but also healing. Much like how she had once walked away from her dream of music under the weight of life's demands. And Elliot, for the first time, found comfort in sharing his past. Sienna didn't pry, didn't demand explanations, she simply stayed, helping him turn unfinished notes into a complete story. One evening, as they neared completion, Elliot surprised her. "I want us to perform it," he said, "at the shareholder gathering next week. It's not a huge gala, just a small, intimate group. Would you be okay with that?" Sienna blinked, heart pounding. "Play in front of your shareholders? Elliot, they're important. You're the one who helped me finish this," he interrupted gently, his gaze steady. "It's just us and the music, Sienna. Nothing else matters." She bit her lip, insecurity creeping in again. The thought of performing without formal training felt daunting. But when she looked into Elliot's eyes, not the eyes of a powerful CEO, but of a man who trusted her, she nodded. "All right, but if I mess up, You're taking the blame." He grinned, a real radiant smile that lit up the room. "Deal." The days that followed were filled with rehearsals. They refined every phrase, every pause. Sienna began to feel her confidence return. Each note affirmed that she did belong at the piano, even if her path had been different from that of polished concert performers. Elliot, on his part, discovered that playing this piece no longer hurt. There was something in Sienna's presence, her humor, her resilience, her ability to turn music into a shared language that helped him face the past without drowning in it. The night before the shareholder event, they ran through the piece one final time in the soundproof room. As the last notes faded, Sienna turned to Elliot, her heart racing not just from nerves, but from the overwhelming feeling that they had created something meaningful together. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I think she would have loved it." Elliot looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "Thank you, Sienna, for helping me finish it." They sat in silence for a while, a space between them filled with unspoken emotion. Choosing to perform this piece marked a turning point, not just musically, but in their connection. It wasn't romance, not yet, and maybe it wasn't friendship in the traditional sense, but it was something profound, a collaboration rooted in shared vulnerability and quiet trust. When Sienna left that night, she carried with her a new sense of assurance, as if the music had reawakened a part of her she thought she'd lost. And Elliot, watching her go, realized that for the first time in years, he was moving forward with the music. And with her. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The 20th floor conference room of Caldwell Enterprises had been transformed into a warm, intimate space far from the cold, calculated environment of typical corporate meetings. Small round tables glowed under the soft flicker of candlelight, casting golden reflections onto the glass walls that overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline. Around 30 guests were present, trusted shareholders, and a few close business partners, all dressed smartly but without extravagance. There were no reporters, no cameras, just the quiet elegance of an evening meant for those closest to Elliot Caldwell's empire. Sienna Harper stood in the corner of the room, nervously clutching the hem of a simple black dress borrowed from a coworker. She had never attended an event like this, not as a server, but as a performer. Her heart pounded, not just from the pressure of playing in front of such influential people, but from the weight of the music she and Elliot were about to share, a piece he had written for his late wife, now completed with her contributions. She glanced at Elliot just a few steps away, speaking with an older shareholder. Dressed in a charcoal suit, he looked calm and composed, but when their eyes met, he gave a small nod, as if to say, "You've got this." The Steinway grand piano had been brought in from the soundproof room and placed at the center of the conference space on a small platform, modestly adorned with a few flickering candles. When Elliot stepped forward and gestured for everyone to be seated, the room quieted immediately. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his deep voice steady and clear. "This isn't a typical meeting. I wanted to share something more personal, a piece of music that I began long ago and recently completed with the help of someone very special." He turned to Sienna and extended a hand, inviting her to the piano. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the platform, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. She sat on the left side of the piano bench. Elliot took the right. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the keys, but the gentle brush of his shoulder against hers grounded her. "Just us and the music," he whispered, repeating the same words he'd used to reassure her before. They began to play. The piece, titled E.L., opened with low, melancholic tones, each note a whisper of grief, each phrase a memory stirred. Elliot led the opening, his fingers moving with practiced grace and quiet emotion, telling a story only he could begin. Then Sienna joined in, her brighter harmonies weaving in like threads of light through shadow. Together they created a composition that spoke of sorrow, healing, and the strength it took to move forward. Their hands moved in perfect rhythm, sometimes so close that their fingers brushed, but they didn't flinch. They were lost in the music, the room around them fading into silence. The audience didn't move. Accustomed to charts and quarterly reports, These powerful individuals now found themselves absorbed in a story told without words. An older woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A man in a navy suit bowed his head, visibly moved. When the final note rang out, soft and lingering, fading slowly into the air, a breathless pause filled the room before it erupted in applause. The sound was thunderous, sincere, echoing against the glass walls. Sienna exhaled, the pressure in her chest releasing all at once. She looked at Elliot, who met her gaze with quiet pride. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. He stood, nodded to the audience, then offered his hand to help her up. She smiled, her heart swelling with a new kind of confidence. For the first time, she didn't feel like a waitress sneaking piano practice in her spare time. She felt like she belonged at the keys. After the performance, guests approached them with praise and curiosity. An older man with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses stepped forward and shook Sienna's hand. "Young lady, where were you trained? That performance was extraordinary," he said warmly. Sienna laughed softly, her natural humor returning. "Thank you, sir, but I was only taught by my grandmother, and maybe a little bit of luck." She glanced at Elliot, who gave her a subtle nod, his way of saying he saw something deeper in her talent than mere luck. Another woman in a flowing red silk dress leaned in. "Do you plan to perform professionally? I'd love to invite you to play at one of our charity galas." Sienna blinked, caught off guard. I've never thought about that. I play because I love it." But in her heart, a flicker of possibility sparked something she had never dared to imagine before. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Elliot and Sienna lingered near the piano. The space between them was quiet now, but charged with something unspoken. "You did beautifully," he said, his voice low and warm. "They loved it. I loved it." She looked up, meeting his gaze no longer cold but deeply sincere. "Thank you, Elliot, for believing I could do it." They didn't need to say more. Their eyes held a mutual understanding. Music had said what words couldn't. That night, as Sienna walked out beneath the lights of Manhattan, she felt something shift inside. She no longer doubted her gift, no longer felt small in Elliot's world, and Elliot, standing alone by the window, watching her disappear into the city, realized that the piece they had played wasn't just a tribute to the past. It was a bridge, one that had led him to a future he never thought he would want again. One quiet Wednesday afternoon, as the sunlight softened across Manhattan's towering skyline, Sienna and Elliot sat tucked into a cozy corner of a cafe near Caldwell Enterprises. The warm scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the soft hum of jazz music, easing the tension that had quietly built up over their long week. Sienna, wearing a simple blue sweater, cradled a cappuccino between her hands, her eyes distant and tinged with sadness. Elliot, in a gray shirt with no tie, noticed immediately her usual spark of humor was missing, replaced by a thoughtful stillness. "Something's wrong," Elliot said gently, his voice absent of the cool CEO tone. He'd grown used to their casual talks, moments when Sienna would make him laugh with stories about difficult customers or childhood misadventures. But today she seemed burdened heavy with something unspoken. Sienna took a slow breath, fingers tightening around her cup. "It's my sister, Lily," she said, her voice soft but steady. "She's 12, born with a heart defect. The doctors say she needs a transplant, but the wait list is long, could take years, and I'm not sure she has that much time." She paused, eyes dropping to the table as her voice wavered. "My job barely covers rent and medical bills. I feel helpless." Elliot sat in silence, his chest tightening. He already knew about Sienna's financial situation from Lydia's quiet background checks, but hearing it from her raw, unfiltered cut deeper. "I can help," he said, his voice low and unwavering. "Financially, whatever Lily needs, I can cover it. You just have to say the word." Sienna looked up, her eyes flashing briefly with a mix of pride and pain. "Thank you, Elliot, but no." Her voice was firm. "I don't want charity. Lily and I will figure it out." She offered a small, apologetic smile, trying to lift the weight in the air. "I guess I just needed somewhere to let it out. Your piano helps, you know?" Elliot nodded slowly, understanding that her strength wouldn't allow her to accept help so easily. "The music room is always open for you," he said, "whenever you need it." That night they returned to the soundproof room in Elliot's office. The Steinway grand piano stood quietly, a silent friend ready to listen. Sienna sat down and didn't reach for sheet music. Her fingers drifted freely over the keys, weaving an improvised melody, one filled with the fear, hope, and silent prayers she held for Lily. Elliot didn't just watch. He joined her, adding soft counter melodies, responding to her music with quiet empathy. They didn't speak much, there was no need. Music had become their language, their shared place of refuge. In the weeks that followed, their Wednesday night sessions became more than just musical practice, they became a ritual of healing. After long shifts at the hotel, Sienna would slip into the familiar room, where sometimes they played old duets. But more often, they followed whatever emotions came. Her music carried her worries. Elliot's playing stood beside hers, wordless and steady. He never pushed her to accept help, but the way he looked at her with quiet understanding spoke volumes. What Sienna didn't know was that Elliot had already started helping behind the scenes. Late at night, long after she'd left, Elliot remained in his office. With Lydia's help, he researched transplant programs, contacted surgeons, reached out to hospitals with shorter waiting lists. He reviewed medical funding networks and even considered anonymous sponsorship options to improve Lily's chances. He didn't do it out of duty. He did it because he cared deeply for Sienna. Not just as the gifted woman who sat beside him at the piano, but as someone resilient, someone real, someone whose strength made him want to help, even if she'd never ask. One evening, after a long, unstructured melody faded into silence, Sienna leaned back in the piano bench and sighed. "Thank you, Elliot. These nights, they keep me from overthinking. When I play, I feel like Lily's right here with me, like everything's going to be okay." Elliot looked at her, something warm blooming in his chest. "You're stronger than you know, Sienna," he said quietly, "and Lily is lucky to have you." She smiled, sad but sincere. "I don't know about that, but I'm not giving up. She's all I've got." They played again, notes flowing between them like a bridge not just of music, but of understanding. Their bond, still undefined, deepened with each evening at the keys. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was respect, it was connection, built slowly, quietly, in the silences between the chords. That night, when Sienna left the music room, she felt a little lighter, like the piano had helped her release the fear she tried so hard to keep hidden. And Elliot, standing alone in the now quiet room, looked out over the Manhattan skyline. He knew his feelings for Sienna were changing, but more than anything, he wanted to help her not out of obligation, but because he believed in her, because he wanted to see her smile, unburdened, because her strength inspired him in ways he'd never expected. Top of form, bottom of form, soft, twinkling lights hung overhead in the small ballroom of the Grand Astoria Hotel, casting a warm glow over the intimate space where a discreet charity concert was being held on a Friday evening. It was smaller than the grand galas typically hosted there, but its coziness gave it a sense of closeness and sincerity. About 40 guests, wealthy donors, and a few influential figures from the medical community sat at elegantly arranged round tables, sipping wine, ready to enjoy an evening of music. Sienna Harper, dressed in a simple yet elegant black gown borrowed from a coworker, stood backstage, her heart pounding. The hotel manager had informed her that she would be the featured performer at this fundraiser, an event described as supporting transplant patients. She had eagerly accepted, knowing the cause aligned with something deeply personal, her younger sister Lily, who still waited for a heart transplant. What she didn't know was that Elliot Caldwell was the true mastermind behind the evening. He had carefully orchestrated every detail, not just to showcase Sienna's talent, but to create an opportunity that could change Lily's future. Elliot, in a deep navy suit, stood in a corner of the room, engaged in polite conversation with a donor, though his eyes frequently drifted toward Sienna. Over the past 2 weeks, he had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, connecting with donors, hospitals, and a nonprofit medical organization to ensure that the money raised tonight would place Lily in a top priority transplant program. He kept his involvement a secret, knowing Sienna's fierce independence wouldn't allow her to accept such help if she knew. When the MC introduced her, Sienna stepped onto the small stage where the familiar Steinway grand piano waited. She smiled at the audience, doing her best to mask her nerves. Thank you all for being here tonight, she said, her voice steady but touched with vulnerability. I'm not a professional musician, but I hope tonight's music reaches you the way it's helped me get through the hardest days. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The piece she chose wasn't a well-known classical number. It was an improvised composition she had developed during her evening sessions with Elliot. The opening notes were gentle, almost like a whispered confession of sorrow, but gradually the melody grew brighter, more hopeful, telling a story of resilience and quiet strength. Every key she pressed felt like a prayer for Lily, a wish for better days. The audience fell into stillness, captivated by the raw emotion in her performance. A few wiped tears from their eyes, deeply moved by the sincerity in every note. When the final chord faded, the room remained hushed for a breath before erupting in warm, sustained applause. Sienna rose and bowed, feeling as though she had released something heavy from her chest. What she didn't know was that the donations collected that evening, over $300,000, were enough to secure Lily a spot in a priority transplant program at one of the nation's top hospitals. And Elliot, standing in the back, watched her with pride shining in his eyes, but stayed where he was, letting the moment belong entirely to her. After the performance, guests approached Sienna with admiration and heartfelt praise. An older woman, dressed in pearls, clasped her hands. "Young lady, you played like the world was listening. You really must perform more often." Sienna smiled, her playful spark returning. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'm just a waitress who happens to know a few notes." She glanced toward the corner where Elliot stood, quiet and composed. His gaze held steady, and in it was a message she could clearly read. "You're so much more than that." Late afternoon sunlight poured through the windows of the 35th floor of Caldwell Enterprises, casting a warm, golden hue across the soundproof music room. Sienna Harper stood outside the door, clutching the strap of her canvas bag, her heart caught between gratitude and something far more complicated. After learning that Elliot had secretly orchestrated the charity concert that helped move her sister Lily up the transplant list, she knew she needed to face him, not to argue but to say thank you, even as her pride still wrestled with the idea of owing him anything. Lily had received her new heart and was recovering well, a miracle Sienna could hardly believe, wrapped in equal parts joy and deep, quiet gratitude. She knocked softly. "Come in," came Elliot's familiar baritone. He was seated at his desk, no suit jacket today, just a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His gray eyes lit up when he saw her. "Sienna," he said, standing. A subtle smile crossed his lips. "I didn't expect to see you this soon." Sienna stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. She took a deep breath, gathering herself. "Elliot, I needed to thank you," she said, her voice honest but carefully measured. "For the concert, for what you did for Lily. She had the transplant last week. The surgery was a success, and she's recovering. I don't know what to say, except that I'm truly grateful." Elliot shook his head and moved closer, his expression kind but steady. "Don't thank me, Sienna. I didn't do it as a CEO or because I wanted you to feel indebted. I did it because I believe in you, your strength, the way you never give up." The simple sincerity of his words, the quiet shift as he naturally referred to her more personally, made her heart skip. The emotional wall she had carefully constructed, one built on pride and the fear of being pitied, began to crack. She looked up at him, her eyes softening, bright with emotion. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, "but because of you, Lily has a chance to live. I don't know how I would have made it without you." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with things neither dared to name. Elliot didn't move closer. He respected the boundary she still held, but the way he looked at her told her he saw her more clearly than most ever had. The next evening, they returned to the comfort of the soundproof room, sitting side by side at the familiar Steinway. The hush of the space wrapped around them like a soft blanket. They chose a duet by Brahms, slow, introspective, and just right for where they both were. As the first notes rang out, Sienna felt a boldness rise within her, fueled by the relief and joy of Lily's recovery. During a quiet section of the piece, when their hands brushed near the middle keys, she gently placed her hand over his, fingers interlacing without a word. Elliot froze for a fraction of a second, glancing down at their joined hands, then back at her. His eyes filled with surprise and something warmer, deeper. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let her hand stay, their connection quiet but unshakable. They said nothing, but the energy in the room shifted as though an invisible door had opened between them, one neither of them had been ready to name, until now. They resumed playing, the piece taking on a new color, each note laced with emotion, a silent acknowledgement of everything left unsaid. When the final chord faded, Sienna slowly withdrew her hand, her cheeks flushed, but she didn't apologize or explain. Elliot didn't ask. He just smiled softly, his gaze telling her he understood and that he treasured the moment just as much. From then on, their piano sessions were different. The music carried unspoken feelings, lingering glances lasted a little longer, and their smiles held more meaning. With Lily recovering, Sienna took a leap. She never thought she'd be brave enough to make she accepted a part-time position, teaching piano at a community music center in Brooklyn. Teaching children, seeing their faces light up when they played their first melody, slowly rebuilt her confidence. She no longer saw herself as just a waitress. She was someone who could inspire through music. Elliot, too, found himself slowly reclaiming what he had once lost. The piano, long abandoned after Emma's passing, now became his sanctuary again. His sessions with Sienna weren't just about notes or rhythm. They were a path to healing. He started composing again, scribbling short melodies onto scraps of paper in his office. The pain no longer haunted him the way it used to. Sienna's resilience, her refusal to be defeated by life, was like a spark that reawakened something inside him. He realized music, and Sienna herself, had helped him find a part of himself he thought was gone forever. One evening, after finishing a tender Chopin duet, Sienna turned to him, eyes glowing. "You know, I used to think I wasn't good enough to play, not good enough to be seen. But these past few months and you made me believe I can do more. And now with Lily getting better, I feel like I can dream again." Elliot looked at her, heart swelling. "You've always been good enough, Sienna. You just needed someone to remind you. I'm lucky I got to be that person." They sat there in the stillness, letting the quiet fill the space. Their relationship hadn't been defined by declarations or labels. But with every note they played, with every silence they shared, it had deepened into something rare, something real. Sienna no longer saw Elliot as just a powerful CEO. He had become her partner in music, in strength, in quiet understanding. And Elliot no longer saw her as someone needing rescue. He admired her courage, her raw honesty, and he could feel his own heart opening again, beat by beat, in the rhythm of the music they created together. That night, as Sienna left the music room, she felt a lightness in her chest and a new kind of hope in her step. Lily was healing, and so was she, not just for her sister, but for herself, for the dreams she thought she'd buried long ago. And Elliot, standing alone by the piano, gazing out the window into the Manhattan night, knew he was feeling something deeper than friendship, something he hadn't dared to name, but was finally ready to explore. Autumn in Brooklyn painted the streets gold, where maple leaves rustled beneath the setting sun. In a modest apartment in Bed-Stuy, the kind with time-worn white walls and creaky wooden floors, Sienna Harper's world felt more alive than ever. An upright piano sat snugly against the wall, a surprise gift from Elliot Caldwell, after she began teaching part-time at a local children's music center. Though not as grand as the Steinway in Elliot's office, the piano's ivory keys carried the breath of reawakened dreams. On the windowsill, small potted plants swayed in the breeze, next to Lily's crayon-colored drawings of houses and pianos. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of laughter, and within those four walls, Sienna had found herself again after years she thought were lost. A year ago, she couldn't imagine making it through the endless hospital bills, the anxiety of wait lists, or the ache of watching her 12-year-old sister suffer. But now, Lily, 13, and stronger every day after a successful heart transplant, was thriving. The miracle had come thanks to a charity concert secretly orchestrated by Elliot Caldwell. And Sienna, now 27, was no longer just a waitress. She taught piano 3 days a week at a community center, guiding tiny hands and bright eyes through their first hesitant notes. Every child's shy smile, every clumsy melody reminded her of herself sitting beside her grandmother, discovering the magic of music for the very first time. It wasn't just passion she'd reclaimed, it was purpose. Elliot Caldwell, still CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, was no longer the cold figure she'd first seen at a black tie gala. Though he remained occupied with international meetings and million-dollar deals, his Saturday nights belonged to Sienna not in luxury boardrooms, but in the warmth of her Brooklyn apartment. Here, among the walls lined with memories and Lily's contagious joy, he found a kind of peace he'd never known he needed. Their piano sessions had become sacred rituals, not just music, but shared pieces of themselves. E.L., the song they'd finished together in memory of Elliot's late wife, Emma, was now the soul of an annual transplant fundraising event. Hosted at the Grand Astoria, the gathering had become a New York tradition, drawing generous donors and prominent medical advocates. Each year, Sienna and Elliot played the piece together, not for show, but to tell a story. Their story, one of loss and healing, of unfinished melodies transformed into something whole. The donations now help dozens of patients like Lily. And for Sienna, it was her way of giving back for the gift life had given her Elliot. One Saturday night, soft light from a table lamp spilled across the piano in Sienna's apartment, casting gentle shadows across the room. Lily had gone to bed early, leaving Sienna and Elliot alone in the quiet autumn breeze drifting through a cracked window. They had just finished a Debussy duet, its glimmering notes echoing the months they had walked side by side. Sienna leaned back against the piano bench, her brown hair loose, her eyes reflecting both joy and thoughtfulness. "You know," she said softly, "a year ago, I thought I'd be stuck in night shifts forever, worried about Lily. Too scared to dream again. But you changed everything." Elliot turned to her, his gray eyes filled not with steel, but something infinitely softer. "No, Sienna, you changed me first," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "I thought music was something from my past, something that only brought pain. But you showed me it could be hope. It could be a future. You showed me that." Her heart fluttered. She glanced at her hands, remembering the warmth of his fingers on the piano keys, the quiet electricity the first time their hands had touched. That moment had been small, but it had changed everything. Their love had grown not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments, shared melodies, and trust that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Elliot paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It was old, slightly worn, with the elegant patina of something that had a story. When he opened it, a simple silver ring with a single sapphire glimmered in the light like a floating note waiting to be played. "If that challenge still counts," he said gently, his voice a whisper of humor and hope. "I think I lost the moment you touched the keys." Sienna blinked, her breath catching. She looked at the ring, then into his eyes, finding nothing but raw, steady truth. This wasn't a CEO's grand proposal. It wasn't for show. It was the quiet promise of a man who had found love not through fireworks, but through music, time, and trust. Her cheeks flushed, and with trembling fingers, she slipped the ring onto her left hand. "I think we both won," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "because I lost the second you smiled at me for the first time." Elliot laughed, a warm, unguarded sound that filled the room. He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It felt natural, new, yet entirely familiar. They didn't rush the moment. There were no speeches, no declarations, just music, memory, and meaning. They sat at the piano again, beginning a new duet, a song they'd written over the past few months, inspired by their shared journey. The opening notes were soft, a hush like a promise. Then came the rising strength of melody, each phrase a testament to how far they'd come. Their hands moved in tandem, sometimes touching, now intentionally. Each brush of skin spoke volumes. "I'm here. I choose this. I choose you." When the final chord faded, Sienna leaned her head on Elliot's shoulder, savoring his quiet warmth. The apartment was still, filled only with the sound of wind and their steady breathing. Then, without warning, Lily burst out of her room, hair tousled, smile wide. "You guys sounded amazing," she declared. "But next time, I pick the song. Something fun." Sienna and Elliot laughed, joy spilling into the room like music. And so their story closed, though not really, not with a finale. Because in that little apartment with a piano, a girl who once thought she couldn't dream, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give, a new melody had begun. EL lived on as a legacy, the fundraiser a tradition, and their love quiet, strong, honest was the song that would never end. And beyond the hum of Manhattan, in that corner of Brooklyn, the music played on.